Throughout history, France's interactions with Africa have been marked by a complex and often brutal relationship. With the end of slavery, which France benefited from and utilized to develop its economy to what it is today, France turned to colonization as a means of making wealth without putting in any work. France's colonization efforts were characterized by exploitation, violence, and cultural suppression. One of the most infamous instances was the brutal colonization of Algeria, which lasted for over a century. The Algerian people faced forced labor, land confiscation, and systemic violence as France sought to exploit Algeria's resources and control its economy. In its pursuit of wealth and control, France employed a range of cruel tactics across its African colonies. In the latter half of the 20th century, as African nations fought for their independence, France often sought to maintain its influence and control through covert means. Neo-colonial practices, economic manipulation, and the support of puppet regimes allowed France to continue reaping the benefits of African resources while giving the illusion of self-governance. We continue to expose how France colonized African countries and plundered its resources, and how the European country continues to control Francophone Africa's financial resources, leaving the region in abject poverty. Also, as a way of supporting our efforts, hit the like button of the video, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Your support means a lot to us. Guinea. Guinea, despite not suffering direct violence or massacres like some other African nations, experienced its own unique form of French cruelty that revealed the extent of France's control and manipulation. The events that unfolded in Guinea under the leadership of Ahmed Sékou Touré shed light on the grim reality of colonialism and the lengths to which colonial powers would go to maintain their dominance. The story of Guinea's struggle for independence serves as a stark reminder of the brutality inflicted upon colonized nations by their European overlords. When Charles de Gaulle presented the choice between autonomy within a new French community and immediate independence to the colonies in 1958, Guinea's resounding vote for independence stood in stark contrast to the choices made by other French colonies. The Democratic Party of Guinea, led by Ahmed Sékou Touré, demonstrated the will of the Guinean people, yet this assertion of self-determination triggered a venomous response from the French colonial elite. In an act of fury and vindictiveness, the French administration in Guinea embarked on a campaign of destruction that aimed to obliterate the symbols of French colonization. As French nationals left the Guinea due to the country choice of independence rather than being a French community, they destroyed everything they could lay their hands on. This destructive rampage, intended to punish Guinea for rejecting France's control, left a mark on the country's landscape. Schools, public administration buildings, and other infrastructure were demolished. Educational institutions, which should have been spaces of enlightenment, were reduced to rubble, leaving generations of Guineans deprived of the resources necessary for progress. Even livestock and food supplies were not spared, as farms were laid waste and warehouses set ablaze. This calculated destruction was more than just a display of anger. It was a sinister message sent to other colonies considering similar paths to independence. France's stranglehold on its former colonies extended beyond physical destruction. The economic exploitation that underpinned colonial rule continued to manifest in insidious ways. Guinea's attempt to issue its own national currency in 1960 was met with fierce resistance from France, which orchestrated a sabotage operation known as Opération Persil. This operation aimed to plunge Guinea into economic turmoil by flooding the country with forged currency, causing hyperinflation and destabilizing the nascent economy. This strategy mirrored the callous tactics of the past, as France sought to maintain control over Guinea's financial system, ensuring that the country remained dependent on its former colonizer. Furthermore, France's exploitation of Guinea extended to fomenting internal strife and armed conflict. The plan included arming opposition figures and organizing them into paramilitary groups with the intent of sparking civil unrest and eventually overthrowing Touré's government. This scheme demonstrated France's willingness to employ any means necessary to crush resistance and maintain its grip on power. The fact that such a plan was conceived, reflecting a calculated disregard for the lives and well-being of the Guinean people, underscores the depth of France's callousness and the lengths it was willing to go to preserve its dominance. France's oppressive rule in Guinea had long-lasting effects even after colonial times. The suffering caused by destruction, economic control, and political turmoil deeply affected the country. Guinea's fight for freedom inspired other colonized nations, but the harsh punishment it received for asserting its independence created fear that stopped others from doing the same. Ahmed Sékou Touré was firmly committed to freedom, even amid tough challenges, embodying the resistance against colonial oppression. His saying, "We choose freedom and poverty over wealth and slavery," echoed the feelings of many Africans who wanted self-rule and honor, even if it meant less wealth. Guinea's path to independence shows how strong human determination is and reminds us that fighting colonialism was about more than just freedom. It was about regaining dignity and self-rule. Madagascar. France's colonial legacy in Madagascar is a somber tale of exploitation, oppression, and atrocities that have left indelible scars on the island's history. The Malagasy Protectorate, established in 1882, was more than a mere claim to foreign affairs. It was a systematic endeavor by France to exploit the resources, subjugate the people, and quell any form of resistance in its pursuit of imperial dominance. From the moment France declared Madagascar a protectorate, its intentions were clear: to exert control over the island's vast resources, which included valuable commodities like spices, coffee, and precious minerals. The justification for this colonial endeavor was built on flimsy pretexts, claims over outlying islands, and questionable treaties. The Malagasy population, with their own rich cultural heritage and traditions, found themselves subject to foreign rule that saw their land and labor exploited for the benefit of the colonial power. France's presence in Madagascar was marked by a consistent pattern of oppression. The successive sovereigns, Ranavalona II and Ranavalona III, along with their prime minister Rainala Yarivoni, fiercely rejected French claims and demands. However, France was unrelenting in its efforts to stifle any resistance. Diplomatic engagement quickly escalated into military bombardments as France sought to bend Madagascar to its will. The Malagasy government's pleas to foreign allies for support fell largely on deaf ears, allowing France to continue its exploitative and oppressive rule unchecked. In 1895, the situation took a turn for the worse. A French expeditionary force occupied Antananarivo, the capital, effectively imprisoning the Queen and Prime Minister. This marked a pivotal moment in France's pursuit of total control over Madagascar. The subsequent declaration of Madagascar as a French colony in 1897 sealed the fate of the Malagasy people under the thumb of colonial oppression. France's response to any form of dissent or uprising was merciless. The Menelamba Rebellion in 1895, driven by a desire to resist corruption, foreign influence, and the spread of Christianity, was met with brutal force. The French not only violently quelled the rebellion, but also executed key members of the royal family, leaving a lasting trauma on the collective memory of the Malagasy people. This repression of resistance movements not only silenced dissent, but also created a void in leadership and social structures, which would have lasting implications for Madagascar's path to independence. France continued to orchestrate a systematic exploitation of the island's rich resources, pillaging its natural wealth for its own gain. This laid the foundation for a cycle of oppression that would persist for decades. The Malagasy people were subjected to harsh labor conditions on French-owned plantations, where their toil fueled the colonial machine. As France amassed profits from Madagascar's resources, the local population endured suffering and deprivation. In their bid for independence, courageous Malagasy leaders like Joseph Raseta, Joseph Ravoahangi, and Jacques Rabamananjara emerged as beacons of hope. They navigated the treacherous waters of the French political system, attempting to secure self-governance through peaceful means. However, France's response to this legitimate quest for freedom was callous and brutal. The socialist Ramadier administration's harsh crackdown on the nationalists' efforts only further radicalized the Malagasy populace. This desperation would eventually culminate in the Malagasy Uprising. The uprising, ignited in March 1947, was a response to years of oppression and disillusionment. Coordinated surprise attacks targeted military installations and French-owned plantations, signaling a collective cry for liberty. However, France's response was shockingly disproportionate. The French military's actions were marked by mass executions, torture, and horrifying atrocities that plunged the nation into darkness. The relentless assault on entire villages left scars that would endure for generations. Lev Malagasy prisoners were even thrown out of airplanes, showcasing the depths of the cruelty inflicted upon the people. The estimated death toll from the uprising varies, with figures ranging from 11,000 to over 100,000. Regardless of the exact count, the scale of the suffering is undeniable. By August 1948, the nationalist leaders had been quelled, and by December of the same year, the uprising was ostensibly crushed. Yet, the horrors that unfolded during those fateful months would forever linger in the collective memory of the Malagasy people. The aftermath of the uprising was equally devastating. The violent repression obliterated a generation of Malagasy leadership, leaving a void that would pose formidable challenges as the nation transitioned to independence in 1960. The Malagasy society was scarred, its progress stifled, and its future compromised by the ruthless tactics of French authorities. Even the leaders who survived, like Monja Jaona, were met with imprisonment and persecution, their dedication to their people's cause met with brutal suppression. France's culpability in these atrocities extended beyond the immediate violence. The French government actively concealed the truth by classifying documents related to the uprising, fostering a culture of silence that spanned decades. It was only in 2005, when French President Jacques Chirac visited Madagascar, that a tentative acknowledgement of the atrocities was made. This speaks to a systemic effort to evade accountability and responsibility for the crimes committed. The legacy of France's colonial exploitation continues to reverberate through Madagascar's history. The wounds inflicted upon the Malagasy people have not faded with time, as evidenced by the museum dedicated to the uprising inaugurated in Moramanga in 2012. France's relentless pursuit of resources and control has cast a long shadow over the nation's trajectory, impeding its growth, stability, and prosperity. Morocco. France's colonial conquest of Morocco, spanning from 1907 to 1934, is a grim chapter in history, characterized by a litany of atrocities, systematic oppression, resource plundering, and unrelenting exploitation. The Treaty of Fez in 1912 marked a pivotal moment, as France imposed its protectorate over Morocco, ostensibly to guide the nation towards modernization and development. However, this guise of progress was but a veil that concealed the true nature of French rule, a brutal and domineering regime that sought to subjugate the Moroccan people and extract the nation's riches for its own gain. France faced local resistance from the outset of its invasion, with thousands of Moroccans killed fighting for independence. In 1912, French commanders violently cracked down on Moroccan soldiers who mutinied in Fez, resulting in 800 deaths. Amazigh tribesmen later laid siege to the city and were defeated in a crackdown that caused a further 600 to be killed. France waged war on a number of regions which refused to bow to European overlords, notably against the Zayans and the Riffians, and was able to subdue them. Under the name of governance, France established the Native Policy Council, led by Hubert Lyautey, supposedly to manage colonial rule. However, this council actually worked as a tool to control and influence situations, implementing policies that tightened the colonial hold. One troubling aspect of this rule was how Moroccans' right to gather and express their thoughts politically was curbed. They were not allowed to hold large political meetings with the excuse that they might be exposed to ideas they couldn't understand. This questionable excuse aimed to disempower Moroccans and keep them subservient, preventing them from uniting against the harsh French rule. The control also reached into the domain of media and information sharing. The French authorities tightly controlled information by censoring Arabic-language newspapers from discussing politics. This clear effort to silence the press led to rightful accusations of censorship, making it even harder for Moroccans to express their concerns and hopes. The Al Alam newspaper, connected with the Istiqlal Party, faced severe censorship, where entire articles were consistently stripped of their content. This manipulation of information aimed to twist how things were seen and keep up the appearance of colonial kindness. In 1947, a deeply disturbing event highlighted France's severe actions in Morocco, the Massacre of April 7th, planned by French authorities to disrupt Sultan Mohammed V's visit to Tangier. This event was a horrifying display of violence against everyday Moroccan civilians. Senegalese tirailleurs, under the French colonial rule, played a key role in carrying out this terrible act. Over a span of around 24 frightening hours, these tirailleurs shot indiscriminately into neighborhoods, leading to the tragic deaths of 180 innocent Moroccan civilians. This massacre was a stark example of how far colonial powers were willing to go to suppress any form of opposition and maintain control. The very purpose of the massacre was to quell the rising tide of demands for independence. Sultan Mohammed V's intended visit to Tangier to deliver the Tangier speech, which called for Moroccan independence and territorial unification, was a rallying cry for the nation's self-determination. France, fearing the potency of this message, orchestrated the massacre in a desperate attempt to sabotage the Sultan's journey and silence the call for liberation. The fact that the Sultan persevered and delivered his historic speech in Tangier, despite the tragedy, serves as a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Moroccan people and their unyielding quest for freedom. Apart from the evident violence and oppression, the lasting impact of colonization on Morocco also includes the exploitation of its resources, which remains a painful aspect of its history. France systematically took advantage of the country's valuable natural reserves to benefit its economy. This exploitation wasn't just limited to physical resources. It also affected the country's cultural and historical wealth. Through its control over Morocco's government, economy, and society, France used its resources for its own advantage, resulting in economic inequality and social differences that continue to affect the nation. Economic and financial exploitation of Africa. In the middle of the 20th century, a crucial time emerged when African colonies, previously under French rule, began their journey towards independence. This shift was pivotal, as these territories sought their freedom. For France, this meant the potential loss of valuable resources and wealth that these colonies had been providing, but also had important economic consequences. These resources, like minerals, agricultural products, and other raw materials, were crucial for France's industries and economy. The colonies had been acting as a sort of resource reservoir, and their newfound freedom could jeopardize France's economic stability. To tackle this challenge, France introduced new policies that aimed to maintain control over the economic aspects of these newly independent nations. One of the key tools France used was the CFA francs, a currency that was tied to the French franc and later to the euro. This currency arrangement meant that the former colonies' economies were closely linked to the French economy, providing France with a degree of economic influence even after these countries gained independence. The CFA franc, while offering stability in the early years, also came with its criticisms. Some viewed it as a continuation of economic colonialism, as these countries had limited control over their monetary policies. France retained certain powers, like managing foreign exchange reserves, influencing interest rates, and deciding on currency devaluations. This meant that even though these nations were politically independent, they still had a significant economic tie to France. By maintaining control over the monetary policies of these newly independent countries, France essentially secured a way to ensure that its economic interests wouldn't be severed. This intricate financial web allowed France to continue benefiting from the resources and wealth of its former colonies, even in the post-colonial era. Starting in 1961, France asserted ownership over the financial reserves of 14 African countries, which were all previous colonies. These included Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Congo-Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. The CFA franc was made in December 1945, when the French government agreed to the Bretton Woods Agreement. It became the money used in Les Colonies Françaises de l'Afrique, or the CFA, or French colonies of Africa. The French central bank promised to support the currency at a set rate, but they asked the African countries to put 50% of their CFA francs into the French central bank. This gave France control over these countries' resources. The CFA was later split into the Communauté Financière d'Afrique, or Financial Community of Africa, which included the West African countries of Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo, and the Communauté Financière de l'Afrique Centrale, or Financial Community of Central Africa, including Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Chad, the Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. African countries have tried time and time again to liberate themselves from French control. And more often than not, African revolutionaries in former French colonies are met with violent resistance from the French government. The death of Barthélemy Boganda is a perfect example of this. Boganda was the president of the Central African Republic from December 1958 to March 1959. During this time, Boganda cut a lot of ties that the Central African Republic had with France. For example, he founded the Movement for the Social Evolution of Black Africa, a political party dedicated to liberating the French colonies in Africa, specifically the Central African Republic, and the French Congo. Boganda was instrumental in the country gaining independence and planned to use his power to liberate other African territories from French rule. In an attempt to stop the Central African Republic's growing independence movement, France arrested Boganda during his 1951 campaign for endangering the peace. He was released shortly thereafter, but he was unfortunately killed in a plane crash in March 1959. The French General Secretariat of Civil Aviation headed an investigation into the crash, yet never publicized their report. The French newspaper L'Express leaked parts of the report that revealed that traces of explosives were found in the wreckage of Boganda's plane, and in response, the French High Commissioner suppressed all copies of L'Express printed in the Central African Republic. Boganda's efforts to break ties with France and lead his nation towards independence showcased the strong desire for autonomy among these African territories. France's response, including his arrest and the suspicious circumstances of his plane crash, reveals the determination to quell any movement that threatened their dominance. The fact that France went so far as to suppress information and manipulate the media to maintain its grip on power underscores the depth of its commitment to control, even at the cost of human lives and the aspirations of those seeking freedom. Another example is the Cameroonian Marxist politician Félix Roland Moumié. Félix Roland Moumié was a Cameroonian Marxist politician and a prominent figure in the anti-colonial movement in Cameroon. He was born on November 29, 1925, and he played a significant role in advocating for Cameroon's independence from French colonial rule. Moumié became politically active at a young age and joined the Union des Populations du Cameroun, or UPC, a nationalist and anti-colonial political party in Cameroon. He rose through the ranks of the party and eventually became one of its leaders. Moumié's leadership and activism made him a target of both French and Cameroonian authorities who opposed the UPC's agenda. Tragically, Moumié was assassinated on November 3, 1960, in Geneva, Switzerland, under suspicious circumstances. It is widely believed that he was poisoned when a French Secret Service agent slipped a dose of a toxic substance known as thallium into his drink in Geneva. Maureen was not the only victim. Another was Nyobe. Nyobe, whose full name was Reuben Nyobe, was a prominent Cameroonian anti-colonial and independence leader. He played a crucial role in advocating for Cameroon's independence from French colonial rule and was a central figure in the anti-colonial movement. Nyobe's leadership and activism made him a major threat to both French colonial authorities and Cameroonian elites, who collaborated with them. In 1958, he was declared enemy number one by the French government, leading to a violent crackdown against him and the UPC. Tragically, Nyobe was killed by French forces in a military operation in September 1958. The same was the case of Sylvanus Olympio. Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of the Republic of Togo, is another significant African leader that would meet his end because he tried to improve his own country and end the ruthless exploitation of the French. In the 1960s, he would try to take his country out of French control by refusing the Colonization Continuation Pact. However, he would agree to pay an annual debt to France for the so-called benefits Togo got from French colonization. It was the only conditions for the French not to destroy the country before leaving. However, the amount estimated by France was so massive that the reimbursement of the so-called colonial debt was close to 40% of the country budget in 1963. Consequently, the financial situation of just independent Togo was very unstable, and in order to get out of this situation, Olympio decided to leave the monetary system set up by colonial France and created the currency of the country. On January 13, 1963, 3 days after he began printing the new bills, a squad of soldiers supported by France seized and killed the first elected president of independent Africa. Olympio was executed by an ex-French legionnaire, the sergeant of the army Etienne Gassingbé, who, at the same time, received a bonus of $612 from the local French embassy for the success of his mission. Olympio's dream was to build an independent and autonomous country, but the idea did not correspond to the French wishes. Etienne Gassingbé would become president and enforce the monetary system provided by France through practices like the CFA franc currency and controlling a large portion of African countries' reserves. France maintains economic control that hampers the growth and independence of these nations. The presence of French military bases in Africa also raises concerns about neo-colonial power dynamics and contributes to political instability. It is important to expose these issues and bring attention to the harm caused by France's actions. The CFA franc, for example, limits the economic choices of African countries and keeps them dependent on France. This dependence restricts their ability to address important social and developmental needs, keeping them trapped in poverty. Moreover, France's control over African countries' reserves prevents them from using their own resources to improve their societies, making them some of the poorest countries in Africa. This control reinforces economic dependence and prevents these nations from making independent decisions about their futures. Africa cannot develop as long as France continues to see the continent as nothing but a tool to enrich France and advance France's global political influence. It's becoming increasingly apparent that France needs to confront its historical actions in Africa, which have caused immense suffering through centuries of slavery, oppression, and exploitation. The time has come for France to acknowledge its role in these atrocities and take responsibility. Reparations to the African people are not just a call for justice, but a way to acknowledge the lasting impact of these actions on the continent. Returning what rightfully belongs to Africa signifies a step towards healing and reconciliation. It's a chance for France to rewrite its relationship with Africa, moving from a history of pain to one of mutual respect and cooperation. The path to a more equitable future starts with addressing the past and working together towards a better tomorrow. This brings us to the end of this video. Tell us what you think in the comment section, as we are always interested in your thoughts. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos to let more people know the truth about blacks and to hear their own part of the narratives. Thanks for watching.